Hi, folks. I'm going to partner with T.S. Eliot across 100 years or so and go through G. Alfred Prufrock as T.S. Eliot is reading it to us, performing it, and we'll see where that takes us. Okay, so I am going to share our screen, waiting for this. Okay, this should work. I tested it out before. Okay, so hopefully you are hearing T.S. Eliot.
Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table.
So let us go then, you and I, the evening spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. So when you think about a patient etherized upon a table, that's a very stark image, right? In some ways, it's terrifying, right? Because the patient can't speak, the patient is not conscious, so the patient can't reason, the patient can't think critically, et cetera, and so on, and is just kind of there at the mercy of any actor, right? Any kind of interference. In a way, what we're going to see is that's how Eliot kind of feels in this poem. But at the same time, you have this very beautiful image, right, of the evening spread out against the sky, you know, and the whole idea of ether as being that which allows one to be outside of regular consciousness, but that's sort of stacked against, that's juxtaposed with etherized upon a table, which is, when one is prepped for surgery, right?
Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one night deep hotel and sawdust restaurant with oyster shells. Streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead.
Streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent. So what he's talking about, really, as you can gather, is there like these sort of forgotten, um, not so much talked about sort of working class, lower class, uh, streets, one night cheap motels, sawdust and oyster shells. This is, if you go to old school barbecue restaurant, you know what I'm talking about, where there would be sawdust on the floor, right, to catch the grease and the barbecue sauce and everything else, right? Is the floor is covered in sawdust, and this is that with oysters, with yeah. And of course, it's not lost on Elliot. It's probably not lost on most of you that an oyster shell is reminiscent of Venus or Aphrodite or Aphrodite, however you want to say her name, the goddess of love, right? But this is an oyster shell being cracked open and the stuff's, sort of spilling out and, ending up on the floor. So again, we have an idea of where this is going. And of course, we have the words insidious intent. So here we go.
Due to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit.
Do not ask what is it. Let us go to make our visit. Why not ask? Because he's assuming that the reader has already figured out what the question is, right? And we can say, so this is young Elliot, right? He's probably early to middle 20s here. He's not the most confident guy, and he's wondering, right? He's musing to himself so far in the poem of, am I going to be able to present myself, make myself attractive? Am I going to be able to converse, connect, make my way in this world? Am I going to um, have any erotic effect? Right? Am I going to, in other words, am I going to attract um, any of the women that we're about to meet? Right? That he's about to speak of.
In the room the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo.
In the room, the women come and go talking of Michelangelo. So they're perhaps a bit, I mean, in the one sense you can say they're educated because they're speaking of Michelangelo, supposedly speaking about aesthetics, speaking about, if you think about the art of Michelangelo, you're thinking about musculature, you're thinking about the human body, you're thinking about nudity, etc., and so on. But you're also thinking about a very elevated, so, Michelangelo is sort of held in high esteem, so it's all sort of couched in this acceptable uh, way of speaking of the erotic or the human, and in that sense, maybe the women don't necessarily have any insight into what they're talking about, but they're talking about it, right? It's as if we were to have a conversation today about current events and so forth without really sort of taking a 360 view and looking at it and really delving into it, but we just kind of parrot what we see in memes, for example, right? Or if our mode of conversation were memes, right? This is the kind of thing that he's talking. He might be, one could argue that he's talking about is a very surface level type of conversation. In other words, talking of Michelangelo, the the women that are talking Michelangelo, they're doing so because it's considered sophisticated, right? Whether or not their conversation actually is, right?
The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window pane. The yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window pane. Licked its tongue into the corners of the evening. Lingered upon the pools that stand in drains. Let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys. Slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep.
So here he's describing smoke in various ways. And this type of description, grounds him very clearly in the Imagist school, in the Imagist vein, like Ezra Pound, who was very fond of Eliot. Uh, for example, you can very easily visualize this curling smoke up against the smoke licking the window pane, and you know not so long ago, and by not so long ago, I mean 30 years. I mean, that's not that long ago for some of us. There were, I spent a great deal of my 20s in a 24-hour smoke-filled coffee shop, and the smoke literally would, lick itself up against the window pane and so forth. And that's what he was talking about, or that's what he's begins to. That's where the description of the smoke begins, and then it goes into um, other aspects of other sort of manifestations of smoke and descriptions of smoke. And I just messed this up. Let's see if I can regroup here.
Oh, do not ask, what is it?
Heard that.
In the room the women come and go. The window pane. The yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window pane. Licked its tongue into the corners of the evening. Lingered upon the pools that stand in drains. Let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys. Slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep. And indeed there will be time for the yellow smoke that slides along the street, rubbing its back upon the window panes. There will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder and create, and time for all the works and days of hands that lift and drop a question on your plate. Time for you and time for me, and time yet for 100 indecisions, and for 100 visions and revisions.
So there will be time, there will be time. That's what the young person says to make oneself feel better when not sort of going for it, when not, drumming up the courage to talk to someone you're attracted to interject oneself into that conversation, so on and so forth. Uh, he's saying there'll be time for you and me. There'll be time for 100 indecisions, etc., and so on. In other words, he doesn't see on the one hand, he's saying, there will be time. On the other hand, he's saying he doesn't see any uh, clear end to the state of anxiety that he's in rumination that he's in at present. And thereby he has more anxiety, right? A lot of you all probably have experienced something similar to this. This is why I chose this poem as opposed to some of the other really famous Eliot pieces like The Wasteland or like Four Quartets. That and Wasteland and Four Quartets are just incredible pieces of literature, but very long. Okay, we're going to continue here.
Before the taking of a toast and tea, in the room the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. And indeed there will be time to wonder, do I dare and do I dare? Time to turn back and descend the stair with a bald spot in the middle of my hair. They will.
So he goes back to the women come and go, right? Because it's like a refrain because it's never ending. It's continuing, right? He hasn't done anything to change the pattern, right? And so he's reliving the same pattern, night after night, when he goes out to the coffee shops and restaurants and so forth. And then he's talking about, do I dare, do I dare? When he has a bald, and he's talking about having a bald spot on his head, meaning that, in the future, right, when he finally does get up the courage, right, he'll have a bald spot, he will be essentially middle aged.
Will say how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin, my necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute there is time for decisions and revisions, which a minute will reverse.
Do I dare disturb the universe? In other words, do I interrupt this pattern again by interjecting something that will change it, right? A profession of love or amorous attraction or an interjection of an idea, something to change the course of the conversation, so on, to become a part of the conversation rather than just an observer, right? This is the big question. Do I dare disturb the universe, right? Do I dare become an active participant rather than a patient etherized upon a table, right?
For I have known them all already, known them all, have known the evenings, mornings, afternoons. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. I know the voices dying with a dying fall beneath the music from a farther room. So how should I presume? And I have known the eyes already, known them all, the eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase. And when I am formulated, sprawling on a pin, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin to spit out all the butt ends of my days and ways?
So he's saying he knows, has known them all and so forth. He's measured out his life in coffee spoons. So that's just talking about, him playing out the scenarios in his head. Well, what if I go and talk to this woman? What if I, do this? What if I do this? He's played it all out over and over in his mind, right? Um, so this is a very again, this poem is dealing with emotions and anxiety and so forth that a lot of us can relate to, and in that way, it's very much a 21st century poem, I should say, as it is an early 20th century poem.
And how should I presume? And I have known the arms already, known them all, arms that are braceleted and white and bare, but in the lamplight down with light brown hair. Is it perfume from a dress that makes me so digress? Arms that lie along a table or wrap about a shawl. And should I then presume? And how should I begin? Shall I say, I have gone at dusk through narrow streets and watched the smoke that rises from the pipes of lonely men in shirt sleeves lead.
So, how should he presume? In other words, what assumptions should he make about the women, the would-be woman that he wants to speak to, right? On the one hand, he says he's played all of these scenarios in his mind, but also, how much of that is accurate? What presumptions should he make um, before and when speaking to a woman, and how should he begin? How should he go about it? How should he initiate the conversation? Right. Again, pointing back to we talked about Biggie Smalls in conjunction with Walt Whitman. But here, some of the lines from Juicy, come to mind, when Biggie is essentially given instructions on, how to approach a potential lover, right? Um, Creep in from behind, ask them what their interests are, who you be with, and so on, right? So this is the same kind of scenario, right? But Elliot doesn't have, Biggie, if you will, as a coach, right? To say, hey man, go and talk to him this way, go and, interject yourself, right? Elliot is in essence doing this on his own, right? And it's again, it can be frightening because again, not only is Elliot a young guy, he also is he's an expatriate, right? He's in he's an American in Great Britain, which makes him in a Midwesterner at that, right? And Midwesterners, particularly in the early 20th century, they would have had the um, reputation, right, of being fairly puritanical, right, being fairly staid in their presentation and so forth. And so that makes him all the more odd, right, to, again, women and with a certain degree of sophistication or presumed or affected sophistication, talking of Michelangelo, quote unquote, right? Who in the Midwest like hangs out in coffee shops and talk of Michelangelo, and regardless of how pretentious or not pretentious it is, who's doing that in the Midwest in other than Chicago? Who's doing that? Um, uh, in post-war or right at the World War One. Who's doing that in the Midwest? Probably not a lot of people. So here's um, Elliot going over to England, trying to figure all this out. And again, he's got the same desires as any young person would, right? Now, I shouldn't say any young person because I deeply respect my asexual, friends and so forth. But a number of people, vast majority of the population is going to have some degree of amorous or sexual desire one way or the other, and that's really what this is coming with. But also beyond that, the desire for intellectual uh, intercourse as well. You know, again, how is he going to interject himself into the quote unquote universe, the um, the 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 universe of discourse, right? That's going on.
Leaning out of windows, I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. And the afternoon, the evening, sleeps.
So that uh, statement about he should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the Apennines and silence in the seas, right? So claws make noise, right? Um, he's saying, you know, I would have been better to be, you know, like a crab or something, because at least I'd be making noise. At least I'd be putting something out there, right? Rather than being like a patient etherized upon a table. And again, we had the oyster shells before. We have the again an image of a sea creature um, here, kind of portrayed in not the most quote unquote romantic of light. Uh, again, right? So again, pointing to his anxiety.
So peacefully, moved by long fingers, asleep, tired or it malingers, stretched on the floor here beside you and me. Should I, after tea and cakes and faces, have the strength to force the moment to its crisis? But though I have wept and fasted, wept and prayed, though I have seen my head grown slightly bald, brought in upon a platter, I am no prophet.
So here he is elevating this potential exchange with women, or you know, whether we want to couch that as purely sexual, whether we want to couch that as intellectual, whatever. But he's talking about that connection, that anxiety for connection, and that longing for connection. He's elevating this to a religious and potentially transcendental context, in the sense that, you know, he's saying he's fasted and prayed and wept, and he's talking about his slightly bald head being brought in on a platter. He's equating himself to John the Baptist, right? That's, and he says, "I am no prophet." Now, if he, the question one might raise, you know, if he's John the Baptist, who's Jesus? But anyway, um, I don't know that Eliot goes that far in this poem, but he's definitely, he sees himself as he's comparing himself metaphorically to a beheaded prophet, although he says he is no prophet. But in fact, by way of the poem, he is doing what a prophet does, because in the ancient sense, the prophet didn't tell the future. Prophet elucidated the present, right? Prophet looked at the present and saw all the different aspects and said to the people, "Hey, this is where this is where you're going wrong. This is what you need to do," and so on and so forth. He's essentially trying to do that in this poem, but the anxiety, the um, you know, the just discomfort with this poem, but also the relatability of this poem is he's pointing out what the situation is, but as of yet, he really hasn't talked about how to change it, right? He hasn't come up with a a a plan of action to quote unquote disturb the universe, right? Disrupt the universe. Okay, so that's so even though he's comparing himself to John the Baptist, he says, "I'm no prophet," right? Because John the Baptist would have known what to do, right? He would have said, "Well, you need to follow in John the Baptist terms, you need to follow the one that comes after me," blah blah blah, right? So okay.
And here's no great matter. I have seen the moment of my greatness flicker. and I have seen the eternal footman hold my coat and snicker.
Eternal Footman, of course, very Emily Dickinson esque here, being Charon, the the ferryman of death, or death in a carriage, death as the footman to the carriage. Again, Flybuzz when no, excuse me, because I could not stop for death, right? Death is the chariot driver, the carriage driver, right? Or and well, in Dickens's case, not the carriage driver, but someone who rode in the carriage with her. But in this case, it's a footman on a car on the death as a footman of the carriage, eternal footman. So that may or may not be a nod to Dickinson. I don't know.
And in short, I was afraid. And would it have been worth it after all? After the cups, the marmalade, the tea, among the porcelain, among some talk of you and me, would it have been worthwhile to have bitten off the matter with a smile, to have squeezed the universe into a ball, to roll it towards some overwhelming question, to say, I am.
So would it have been worthwhile to talk to you anyway? Right? He's got all this anxiety about wanting to talk to um potential love interest, etc. Right? But at the same time, after talking about, that's he's not going to get around. He's gonna defer his desire so long that death is going to take him, right? The eternal footman. But he says, would it have been worth it at all? And so this is again, this is his internal dialogue coming in and saying, oh dude, you're not really missing out. That's what he's trying to tell himself. I think. I mean, I could be wrong here, but that's what I think.
Come, Lazarus, come from the dead, come back to tell you all. I shall tell you all. If one settling a pillow by her head should say, that is not what I meant at all. That is not it at all.
So here we have it, right? Just a little earlier, he said he was afraid, right? He was afraid when death came to get him, and then he, compares himself, and he says, if he did, make that change, if he did sort of take that direction and make that change, and start initiate that conversation and potentially, um, marry, have an amorous relationship with the woman that he is interested in, right? Talking about her head on a pillow and so on and so forth. But then we get to the real matter. He says, that's not what I meant at all. That's not what I meant at all. The whole crux of his anxiety, right, is the fear of being misunderstood, right? The fear of being misunderstood. And honestly, for me personally, and this is probably a little bit maybe too much self-disclosure, but that's just the worst, absolute worst fear, right? Is not being understood, right? Is to put everything out there and and so forth, and just not being understood. And it's the most frightening when it's those whom you love, right? Those whom we love, when they don't, or that we're attracted to, or whatever that we have a stake with, right? When they don't understand us, that's the worst, because we feel that's the ultimate isolation, right? Um, so that's the realm in which Eliot is speaking here.
And would it have been worth it after all? Would it have been worthwhile after the sunsets and the dooryards and the sprinkled streets, after the novels, after the teacups, after the skirts that trail along the floor, and this and so much more? It is impossible to say just what I mean, but as if a magic lantern threw the nerves in patterns on a screen. Would it have been worthwhile if one, settling a pillow or throwing off a shawl and turning toward the window, should say, that is not it at all. That is not what I meant at all. No, I am not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. I am an attendant lord, one that will do to swell a progress. Stop.
I am not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. So in the Western canon of literature, right? Particularly earlier Western literature, there are two figures really that epitomize um, the Western archetype, the archetype of the um, um, brilliant, self-sufficient, problem-solving, um, uh, mad genius in some sense, if you will. One is Odysseus, right? And of course, he was beloved by Athena and most of the other gods because he didn't depend on them, right? He was a problem solver. He thought, even though he had a bunch of hubris and he really got himself into a lot of trouble, he also thought his way out of problems, right? And the other is Hamlet. Hamlet comes up with this great scheme to expose his uncle and mother in their whole plot to having killed his father, etc., and so on. And I mean, he dies in the process, but he accomplishes what he set out to do, and it's all his ingenuity, right? The idea is that um, really the um, uh, for lack of a this is a cliche, but it's the idea of the rugged individualist, right? The idea that the individual can make a difference. That um, by way of critical thinking and um, careful application, right, one can disrupt the universe, right? Um, and so that's really what's driven, for better or worse, sort of the Western mythos, the Western idea of humanity in a lot of ways, and the value of humanity, humanity, and so forth. Um, in other words, an emphasis on the individual as opposed to an emphasis on the tribe, if you will. Both approaches, of course, have their advantages and disadvantages, right? But definitely, Elliot's saying here, he's not Prince Hamlet. He's just an attendant lord. In other words, he's a supporting character, right? That's how he's viewing himself in this poem, or I should say, the speaker of the poem is just kind of a mask for Eliot, right? He's he's I'm just a I'm a supporting character, right? Um, I'm C3PO. Actually, one really could, if one wants to sort of put a postmodern spin on this, one could really envision, I think, C3PO, um, uh, you know, um, reciting this uh, to in reference to R2D2, perhaps, right? C3PO is the sort of anxiety ridden, he sort of stands in for our own anxiety, right? And Elliot's doing that here. He's like, hey, I'm not Luke Skywalker, right? I'm C3PO, right? It's basically what he's saying.
Art a scene or two, advised the prince. No doubt an easy tool, deferential, glad to be of use, politic, cautious, and meticulous, full of high sentence, but a bit obtuse, at times, indeed, almost ridiculous, almost, at times, the fool. I grow old. I grow old. I shall wear the bottoms of my trousers rolled. Shall I part my hair behind? Do I dare to eat a peach?
So here he's talking about really what everyone fears. Um, as we reach middle age, I myself am in middle age, early middle age, and he's talking about becoming an anachronism, becoming a cliche, becoming inconsequential, right? That's what he's talking about here, and that's the ultimate fear, right? Is is you don't matter, right? And in his case, he's talking about, well, did it ever even matter, right? And then he says, do I dare to eat a peach? So this is a double entendre, as you can probably tell. One hand, it's actually eating a peach, and if you're old and you eat raw fruit at the wrong time of day and so on and so forth in the wrong circumstances, that can cause indigestion and so on, right? So there's that. Also, peach is a metaphor, of course, for female genitalia, right? So there's that. Is so in saying, "Do I dare to eat a peach?" He's both at one point, at one hand talking about envisioning himself old, and the fact that when he's old, it might be eating peach might be a little difficult, right? Come with some consequences. On the other hand, he's harkening back to the present. He's like, do I dare put myself out there, right?
I shall wear white flannel trousers and walk upon the beach. I have heard the mermaids singing each to each. I do not think that they will sing to me.
Again, mermaids, the elusive, untouchable, erotic, right? And he says, I do not think they will sing for me, you know. So he's not granting himself access to the world of the erotic, the world of the visceral, right? Again, he's a Midwestern kid in London, right? Um, may as well be on Mars as far as that's concerned.
I have seen them riding seaward on the waves, combing the white hair of the waves blown back when the wind blows the water white and black. We have lingered in the chambers of the sea, by sea girls wreathed with seaweed red and brown, till human voices wake us and we drown.
Till human voices wake us and read ground. In other words, in his imagination, he has envisioned himself, with these mermaids and so forth, in this, fantastic foreign, you know, erotic um realm, with these in the sea with these mermaids, but then human voices wake us and we drown. So in other words, he has to snap back to reality, and it's the same as it's been, right? So um not the most cheery poem, but a very beautifully rendered poem, and one that a number of us have been able to relate to at various times in our lives, right? um if you like Song of Jail for Prufrock, you know, watch the Elliot documentary. Maybe go online, take a look at the Wasteland. Take a look at the four quartets if you want. Um, he's an important poet. Um, he is maybe not as sort of um, visceral as, say, Stevens or uh, Williams or or Pound, but or Hart Crane, but he's an important poet. He's probably I won't say most famous, but he's quite famous as having written the a play upon which the musical Cats is based, right? So anyway, um, that's my take on Prufrock in real time. No, no notes or anything, just going through the poem and talking about it. And hope you enjoyed it, found it interesting, and so forth. And I'll see you in my next video.